Welcome to the Camira showroom and Clerkenwell Design Week. We're really pleased to have you here today with us for a really thought-provoking and insightful session with Professor Becky Earley. Clerkenwell is the perfect opportunity for us to think about the issues that the industry faces, one of which is the global textile waste crisis. You might have seen on the walls the stats which really demonstrate the sheer scale of the problem and the products that Camira is bringing to market. So Becky is here with us today to help us address the issue. She's a creative researcher, designer and professor of circular design at UAL, and she's also the co-founder of World Circular Textiles Day. Becky spent 30 years in the industry influencing policy, education and design. So I'm really excited to welcome her here today. So I'll hand over to Becky now to begin.
Thanks, Jennifer. Thank you. Hello, welcome. Today I am going to be talking, oh look, there I am, circular design futures. Slightly different because actually everything I do is always looking towards what's next, what are we not doing that we need to be doing in anticipation of. So today we're going to have a look at some L's. I've pulled some L's together and there's 15 minutes at the end for questions. They were very good this morning, so no pressure. But if you can do a question with an L, even better. That's hopefully some things that will just jolt your memory as well, some words to sort of go away and think about. But circular design has been my passion. I think I won a Peugeot Design Award in '99 for my recycled polyester fleece scarves. I mean, I've been working in this area for so long. Centre for Circular Design was my third research centre. We had a 5-year period between 2017 and 2022 where we really deep dived this idea of what is circular textile design. Prior to that, I'd run a couple of research centres, but they were more generally on sustainability or on the future of the textile industry. And so this was an amazing period of time. So a lot of this work comes from the projects that we delivered in that time and some of these brilliant contributions by senior researchers, postdocs and PhD students. So my first L's are language and lenses, and to make the point really that whoever is talking to you about circular design, you need to ask yourself what's their point of view, because there's over 100 definitions of circular design at the moment in the EU, and they're doing a lot of work to actually standardise and create one aligned meaning. I actually chaired a session, a G7 session, a couple of weeks ago with Japan, Italy, the UK, America, and they all have completely different ideas about what circularity, circular textiles is. So we've got to be clear about where we're coming from. And also design itself is an ever-evolving field and has its own language, so it's quite good to sort of check in to make sure you're on the same page when you work on these kind of projects. I work with action research, so I go into companies and I make a project happen. I train the design teams, and then we develop a prototype and we deliver that, hopefully through to the shop floor, not always, because companies are risk averse and some of the best ideas just cannot be delivered in a brand. So another part of my research is to then come back home and do design practice research. This is where I take the ideas and I make something. And you'll all know that as soon as you have the challenge of doing a circular textile project or product and you have the ideas, you generate all the thinking and then you sit down to make it and, well, you're not sitting down, are you? You're literally running around the place trying to make a circular textile product actually happen. The making reveals the reality of the situation and all of the challenges and problems. And those are things that we see in creative design research as opportunities. So my practice has always been making shirts, I haven't used a virgin material now for 30 years. Well, 25, I think I counted it recently. I just use used materials. I use the shirt as a form of thinking, and that helps me then make real circular design strategy. applied ideas, things that can actually be done. Oh, I should say, yes, over this period of time of 23 years, I brought in 2.3 million in funding from Sweden and the EU on projects that my chief role was to understand what sustainable and circular design was and how designers in industry needed to use it. So really quick, just terminology check, promise you it's not very long. Sustainable design is really quite an old term. It started with green, and then it became eco, and then various other languages. But sustainability has been around for a long time, and it's, I suppose, in one way, we're looking at making this stuff in this line better, lighter in footprint, less toxic, less exploitative. We're trying to sustain life on Earth. Circularity is a tool to help with sustainability, and recycling is our mechanism, if you like. I'll show you some different technologies around recycling shortly, but ultimately things will end up at the end of life being disposed of. Circularity is really trying to keep every resource that we make in use forever. So these long loops, long material loops, maybe short products sometimes, but long loops of materials. So trying to keep things really out of the bin, which is good and works, but we are also challenged with many things to think about. So we've got to think about taking less bad stuff into the circle and then really making that circle a reality. So we're often designing blind. We're designing for systems that don't actually exist yet. Often with people where in our supply chain, they're still linear. They need to change too. So it's more than just a design job. It's an advocacy job. It's a political job. And incidentally, those bins, this is a great diagram by Circular Flanders, which shows that bin getting smaller, which is what we're aiming for. But in reality, if you look at the statistics, we are not making less stuff. We are not creating less waste. So that bin is bigger, not smaller. But today's theme is mountain, and I want to kind of just take a moment to think about mountain climbing and climbing Everest and the pioneers that go and build base camps. They might not get to the top, but they build a place for us to get to. And I've talked about this a lot over the years. I see the progress all the time as being further up this mountain we're climbing, and that the pioneers that go ahead, that take the risk, that spend the money, that do the work, they build camps for us, because this is a sharing practice. This is a place of trying to save the planet, blah, blah, blah. But it's actually different to normal business in that we often are sharing a lot of what we're learning instead of being competitors, because we have a common goal. So there's a lot that's not in place, but there are amazing base camps that have been created up this mountain. The latest kid on the block in terms of language is regenerative design, and this is where we're thinking about the fact that we can actually make things better. So it's not just sustaining, it's actually replenishing. So common in architecture to use this term, less common in textiles, because what we have to do is prove the net positive contribution. I've got a nice example of that with wool in a little bit. So life cycle and loops. The sofa and the t-shirt, classically different. This, part of fashion, part of our wardrobe, moving quickly through our lives, could cost £2, could cost 10, could cost up to 200. Greatly varies, but we treat fashion as fast to an extent, and a sofa, a lifelong purchase. Is that true? Shake heads, nod. No, it's not, because the reality is, although that is what we think we're doing, in reality, life cycle assessment and studies show us that that's not what's happening at all. In fact, research in Europe by the EU recently showed that this was quite shocking. So You can have t-shirts that last 30 years. Ask my husband. But I over-dye them, in fairness. And cotton rods, by the way, but anyway. But you can also have sofas. They found that sofas that were designed to last, the designers hoped, 15 years, or that was the intention, were lasting 5 or less even. So what happens in between is that we kind of set up these expectations, but we don't really know the reality of use, and we certainly don't know the conditions of repair or maintenance, or often end of life either. So there's a lot of similarities between these two sectors of fashion and furnishings, and we're aiming for durability, but we should also aim for temporality. I call it human behaviour, human timing. We actually like short cycles too, and every industry, both fashion and interiors, should really understand what it means to provide people with textiles on both a short and a long-term basis. And in terms of that life cycle sort of idea and understanding, you know, it's no good making a product and then measuring it at the end. It's too late to bring in creative design thinking or strategic approaches. We've got more influence to change the product, to eliminate impacts if we're doing the creative thinking at the end. So we have to have this life cycle kind of awareness right at the very beginning of any creative process. Quick question to the room now. Is anybody not familiar with this butterfly? So yeah, I'm asking, okay, the other way around. Who knows this butterfly? Small hands. It's fine, look. It gives me a feedback for whether or not to explain it in much detail. This is the Ellen MacArthur butterfly, 2012, based on cradle-to-cradle theory. And what it basically shows us is that all materials, ideally, should be in either the bio or the technical sphere, right? So if we are really clever, we keep things that can be processed through mechanical recycling and later on maybe composting, maybe incineration. And the technical cycle, we keep things in these loops and we process them separately with their synthetic technologies, whatever they are. I'll go into that a bit later. Really important to sort of have that there. But in reality, textiles is the wicked blend in between. We are always using textiles pretty much that have, if not a blended fibre in, then some kind of chemical additive which does disrupt its purity. So we're dealing with a really complex situation. This is a literature review that's been visualised that showed all the studies, all the research, all the R&D work that was going on at this moment in time, about 2018, into different textiles and how they were being recycled and where they could go. And you know, this is, if we look around our home, if we look around our lives, our wardrobes, we have these materials in abundance in this complexity. And so we're trying to build systems that can cope with these all this sort of range that we have, which we rely on. So today I'm going to mostly talk about cotton, polyester and wool, just so that we sort of, well, because they are the ones getting the focus, because they're the greatest volumes. From a designer's sort of design, I'm already confusing you. I'm already overwhelming you with information, I can tell. But, you know, the thing is, what we've got to do when we're doing circular design is kind of like have that knowledge of materials there, but then we've also got to understand that it's not just one loop that we're designing for, that we're designing maybe for long or short life. Well, how does that change things? And then leasing and service, and then reuse in manufacture, and as well, the big one, material recovery. So we've got to think about a lot of things. And actually, it's not one job. It's not one designer that does all that. It's a team of designers who are all using their different expertise, probably led by a systems designer. Now, it sounds a bit complicated, but this is so exciting because I will show you where this is actually working in a single business and how I just think there are so many opportunities here. So, less and longer, my next L's. Kind of the essentials are The mountain we've got to tackle will be a lot smaller if we stop overproducing and we stop over-consuming, and keep things for longer. So those are the two core principles. This is an interesting way to sort of visualize what that might look like in terms of footprint and impact. It was made by colleagues of mine in Sweden, and it basically proposed that if people just bought 10% less items a year, so from 50 garments down to 45, and the industry eliminated toxic chemicals, which are the black, and introduced recycled materials, the overall footprint could come right down. So, like, basically a series of small changes. It's not one thing that's ever going to make the difference, but it's a series of small, incremental elements all coming together. So recycling technology plays an immensely important, a key part in this, because we have to understand that, and these are the only 5 ways to recycle materials. We're trying to maintain resources, so we're trying to put things back in there. There's either mechanical or chemical ways of treating materials. Interestingly, when I started doing research, this was also on the table, water solubility and biodegradability. But water solubility, you really have to show that that's positive for marine life. I think that's pretty impossible. So scientists don't tend to promote this now for textiles. And biodegradability is smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller pieces forever. So actually not necessarily taking us to a better place. So compostability is still on the table because, and this is where regenerative comes in, there is a great potential for what we're making to replenish the soil. But that's a kind of challenge that's coming next for us all. So really, these are the two big things that the industry is investing in, and when you're designing, you have to know which one you're sending your textile into. So for cotton, quite interesting developments. A recycled material is often seen as weaker, and it often is, and you have to put things into the pot to strengthen the recycled material. With cotton, that's been a problem because as soon as you recycle a textile, you're basically chopping it up in some way. As soon as you chop it up, you're reducing its staple length and its strength. But this company, Santis Textiles, recently has developed new machinery that will make a stronger and longer staple fibre. So we're beginning to see recycled cotton being able to be seen as a premium material rather than a sort of secondary material. And then, of course, in Sweden we have used textiles, used cotton being used with wood. So they're actually able to use their natural sort of forest resources. The paper industry has been on decline for quite some time, but they flipped their forestry into textile production, and they can mix the pulps to make viscose. And this is mostly used at the moment in fashion. But most materials are blended, so cotton and polyester is blended all the time for strength and for price. And so our biggest challenge is probably going to be around this chemical separation of the blends. And Born Again have been working on this for over 15 years now. And we've got kind of viable pilot plants being built now to demonstrate this. And it results in a pellet for polyester in the material and this pulp for cellulose production. So cellulose will give us a next generation of materials, which is either viscose, lyocell, or tencel if you're lensing. I've always worked in polyester. It's a long story of why, but I know it's never popular now. Well, certainly now no one wants to talk about it and everyone wants to ignore it. But it is the highest volume in the marketplace. We've already produced enough to clothe the world for all eternity if we recycle it. So it's a resource we have to think about how we use it, not using it. And so a lot of my research with it has been in putting it into new contexts, This was really interesting as a project, the Eternal Trench Coat that lasts 30 years with Philippa Kay. A brand who, when I started working with them in 2015, had just decided to ban using polyester in their clothing. But through working with us and the life cycle assessment scientists, they started to see that if it was used in the right way, it would bring great value. So it's a recycled polyester, and then it will be recycled at end of life. Those two ends are really important. So I had a challenge in the project of making actually it was to make a polyester garment last as long as polyester lasts, and polyester lasts 200 years. So I started my workshops with designers, getting them to try to design something to basically transform over time and last that long. But no one can think that long. That kind of long life thinking is absolutely, I'm not going to say impossible, but really challenging. So they would scribble all over my worksheets and cards and everything, and we got down to 50 years in the end, and we designed something. I designed something in the end, which was, because polyester is good for regenerating and overprinting and manipulating from a textile point of view. So a shirt that is overprinted several times becomes the lining for a coat, and then the coat uses a detachable disassembly element. That's really important. If I had a talk, it would be on D's, and it would be about disassembly. Take these things apart through a textile lock system, and then they can go forward into new products. Horrible old bobbly fleece dressing gowns were collected by Soex in Germany, and we made car fascias. So the car industry was ahead of the textile industry in its legislation that was coming through to make sure that content was recycled in everything being used in cars. So I said that in a really weird way. They had to, by law, introduce recycled materials earlier than us. And so we looked at how we could use old clothes and make new laser and digitally finished car fascias from these old dressing gowns. Brilliant. So interesting, this project. And interestingly, it wasn't strong enough to meet their safety standards, so we had to add a polymer chain extender into this melting pot of plastic to make it strong enough. But then you've suddenly got this potential future vision of how old clothes can flow into other industries. And polyester, if you keep it somewhere out of the washing machine, if you keep it somewhere high-end and durable, this is a very viable way for us to think about, at least with the mountain, taking out the polyester. It needs to go into interiors, and it needs to go high and in quite bespoke contexts, I think. So that work on sort of long life thinking led me to think about how circular design it was imperative that we kept the footprint small in terms of where things travelled and how these things are exchanged. If you imagine a 50-year shirt, it needs to change hands, and so you don't want to be shipping everywhere. So suddenly I'm looking for materials which are local and can stay local and keep the footprint local. So we did this piece of research in 2019 and identified at that time lots of material science projects that were looking at different applications for wool. And of course, we've seen this come through in the last few years. And what we've got to think about in terms of circularity is what happens next. So when we get something like wool, its impacts are in the fact that it takes a lot of scouring and cleaning. But then if we do something to it that stops it being recycled or being composted later on, we're creating another problem for the future. So resin mixed with wool is, something that this company are working on overcoming. Other work in wool is really interesting. We've now got lasers, we've got enzymes being able to colour wool. And enzymes are actually able to separate out blended wools and take the synthetic dyes and make a powder dye that can be used again. So we've got these amazing developments coming through from material scientists. This is done at De Montfort in Leicester. And these new research projects, funded by Future Observatory, Design Museum, UCRI, there's been an investment recently into the UK fashion and textile industry post sort of Brexit to really shore it up, and circularity has been part of that agenda. And I'm really pleased that the projects now are much more human-centric. We're not just looking at the material development, but we're looking at the material in the whole system. So we're thinking about farmer, we're thinking about the sheep, we're thinking about the designers and the mills and the end product and the end of life. So this is what we need, these holistic kind of collaborative projects. Wool that can prove that it's regenerative. So this is sort of one of our first carbon positive textiles, because you can actually count the benefit of the agriculture to the whole process now. And we didn't used to be able to really count this and go this far back. But now that we can, because LCA has changed so much, we can actually show the benefits of having sheep on the land, which then outweighs some of those impacts that come from things like the energy used to scour, which means that with other elements like disassembly and natural materials in the rest of the shoe, we're getting a carbon positive shoe. So this is regenerative, it's using some circular principles, but it's actually able to take us to the place where we can start to see that positive textiles are possible. My next L's are lives and livelihoods. From the 50-year shirt project and that idea of it moving around, you could start to see all of these entrepreneurial ventures. You could start to see all these new businesses that could come from thinking this way. And so when I did this fashion map a while ago, but for this talk, when I dropped the word furniture over the top of my fashion map, I was like, yeah, that is already here. A lot of this is already happening. These are the roles. And of course, you think of me as an educator, I'm showing this to my students all the time, saying it might not be like a job. You might go and be an in-store remanufacturer and advisor to an interiors company. You might go and run an interiors library where people come and borrow your stuff. So circularity is going to demand that we need and give us the opportunity that we have lots of these people doing lots of these different activities. So I think this is my last case study really, but Sana's work is with human hair. Human hair is as abundant and naturally growing as wool. And she sets herself up and she goes and collects the hair, and then she makes it into a series of products, interior products. And she's designing not just with the material, she's designing the collection, the sorting, the processing, the product itself, even the messaging. She's a PhD researcher with us at the moment. And her most recent project has been to run a space with Newham Council, bringing people in. So she goes out on the bike, she goes to 30 hairdressers, collects the hair, brings it back, makes products, brings in the local community to make stuff with her. She's even doing bricks. Might seem a bit far-fetched, but this is very real. This is something that she can, this will be a business. There is cellulose in, I want to say something else, not cellulose, in hair. What is in hair? Keratin, thank you. So there is sort of potential for this to scale, but more than that, she's demonstrating the kind of design activities, the kind of design thinking that circular textiles is sort of leading us to. So this is pretty much my last point, my last L, liminality. This caused a lot of conversation at the last talk, because this is about the spaces in between, the unexpected spaces, maybe the spaces that are left over from other generations of thinking and attitudes, but it's an opportunity, it's really a provocation. It was from my senior professor, Kay, who was sort of driving through the city or on the bus, going through it and seeing all these unused, huge spaces, these lobbies of corporations, which are sort of empty and sterile and unoccupied. And actually the point of them is to make the corporation sort of seem powerful and we have money because we have space. But in this sort of era, it also feels quite old-fashioned. Like, is this speaking on a corporation's behalf about the kind of future we're envisaging? Are these spaces being used in the best way? Is this an opportunity where circular thinking, circular activity, circular textiles could actually transform? And could this be a way to communicate a different intention for those companies? And also thinking about this liminality, this sort of space between. We have these kinds of spaces at home too. Like, how are we using our space now that the working world is so changing? I probably don't have a time to do much about legislation, but I did do my research, and I got a great colleague to send me some notes from Parliament yesterday, where there was an all-party parliamentary meeting for circular textiles in the UK, and we're on the lookout now. We have to be aware of what's coming down the line, and that's extended producer responsibility, EPR. It's also about recycled content being law to go into certain future products, as well as a kind of question around things like fire retardancy and circularity, and the kind of, in a way, they call them rogue contaminants that will inhibit circularity later on. Leverage just means that so many people have climbed this mountain before us, and they have put in 30 years of work, and it's time for them, to really flourish, I think, but also for us to come to their camps and move on beyond them. So Emily, who's an ex-student of mine, wrote this for me, and I'm just going to read it to finish. But over the years, we've put the work into creating a viable industrial system for recycled plastics. I should have said it's smile plastics. And now the quality, transparency, and the service we're able to offer is second to none. Despite the changing socio-political landscape, every day, through continuous learning and improvement, we are tackling plastic waste with innovation, technology, and creativity, and design is everything. Come and join us on World Circular Textiles Day. It's the 8th of October every year, and we give everyone an opportunity to learn from each other. There's over 180 brands around the world who come online on this day every year and look at what progress we're making and support each other. So sign up if you're interested. And you can find out more on my website. And big thanks to all of those that helped me with the talk. Thank you for coming.
Thanks very much, Becca. I'm really sorry about the screen. I thought you managed that really well. Super fascinating talk. Does anyone have any questions for Becky?
What's the environmental impact on recycling polyester, for example, the chemicals and things you use, and how do you dispose of the chemicals without impacting the environment and the world?
Thank you. The question was about recycling polyester and the environmental impacts of recycling polyester and what happens to the chemicals in that process. So I think I can answer, it's two parts, your question. So first of all, in preparation for this talk, and actually before that I had seen a report that had come out of Sweden by life cycle assessment expert Gustav Sandin is one of the authors, and it took all textile to textile recycling and analysed its environmental impacts and its potential basically it was measuring which is the best textile technology to invest in. And the only one that proved a positive contribution was polyester recycling. And I think we've known this for some time. It saves a huge amount of energy this is only environmental impacts, which means it's only carbon, but it saves much more energy to recycle polyester than to process it from the crude oil. I always tell people, that crude oil for polyester is a byproduct, is a waste product of the aviation industry. We only have synthetics because we have travel. So you've got to decouple those two things to even imagine getting rid of polyester. So people are sold polyester because it's really cheap as a byproduct. So then it's intensely processed. So it's a real sticky one, and you know, people don't like this, but I also find that people often I'm not saying this is you, but put the two things together of sort of ocean plastic and microplastics together with polyester, and those really need to be decoupled because they're not the same pollution, they're not the same waste stream, and they're not the same impacts on the planet. So I think that's been a kind of oversimplification by the BBC, and sorry BBC, but basically the media in general. We've got this stuff, we've been making it since the 60s, we really need to use it well. And then in terms of the chemicals, I actually don't know how to answer that. I actually don't know enough about, I think, what they do with the waste chemicals, but I trust my Swedish science partners for steering, you know, us on the right route with this. And what I thought was extraordinary about that evaluation was that the Swedish industry is based on cellulose and trees. And so for them to do a very in-depth, transparent study and actually say the areas to invest in if we want to reduce carbon in textiles is polyester to polyester, because that doesn't actually work necessarily in their favour. They want their cellulose cyclers. What can I say? I really hate the idea that I'm labelled polyester woman. I'm not, and actually I can give talks about it from different perspectives. But I often work with people in the industry who tell me the reality, and there's an absolute need to maintain and hit price points and durability that polyester does. So I think it's about a balanced ecosystem. I think we've gone too heavily that way because we've gone too cheap with fast fashion. And actually what we've got is an incredible material palette, but we need to rebalance that. But in order to do that, we need legislation and policy to actually control those prices, because it's all price sensitive. Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense.
I have a question. Why don't you move to the hemp?
Why don't we move to hemp?
Yeah.
Ooh.
Better than polyester.
Is it there for some things?
Oh, yeah.
Well,
The
I
only
know
non-
personal
non-cheap
opinion.
Available on Earth.
So we love hemp. Absolutely. Come round and feel this carpet and find Lorraine. She'll tell you about hemp and its natural fire retardancy, etc. I think the answer to that, and it's not a personal preference, I've not got any polyester on today, I was just checking there. It's not a personal preference, it's just price. It really does come down to price, and the fact that it functions so well and that it's durable, it offers a lot to people, and I think it's pretty hard to get off that then. But I will tell you something interesting. When you hear about microfiber pollution in the ocean, the research that is coming to light now, I've known about this for about at least 5 years. In the Galapagos, when they opened the turtles up and they did the research, they're finding 70% of fibres are cellulosic. And they're blue. That's cotton, and that's viscous. And blue means it's probably the denim industry, right? So that's one thing, is like, it's not this, that's what I mean by this kind of plastic ocean and then this association of fibres. That's the first thing. The second thing is that the fibres, when they break down in the ocean, do so really differently. So interestingly, polyester fibres stay intact because of their plasticity. Cellulose break down, and as they break down, they release chemicals. And of the 5 chemicals that they release, 2 of them are carcinogenic, toxic chemicals from cotton. So we've got a really complicated problem with this, in that it's not one thing, it's many industries. It's actually industries that are creating the largest volume as well. So domestic washing machines, yes, but textile industry, fibre production also has an impact. And how they degrade. So the problem is also that we don't have evidence yet that it's cancer causing. And that started to come out, and I think in the last 6 months I've started to see reports where the first studies have started to come back. So I always say it's not going to be good news, but at least like let's get this sort of, again, I think a balanced point of view on it and look a bit deeper. I'm going to give you the mic because it's been recorded.
Do you think extender producer responsibility will help if this comes online here? Because Britain is quite behind, but will it help that mountain that you're demonstrating here in Textile? And how do we actually affect user behaviour at a big level?
Great question. Thank you, Ella. Yes, it will. I absolutely think it will be really useful. It will be difficult because it's going to be expensive and people are going to have to think differently. So to explain it, if you think about a fridge and a white good, for quite a while now you haven't been able to just put that on the street. You know, that is going, or if you do, the company that made it are going to pay for it. So if you make it, you're responsible for it. And the reason that it's going to really work is most companies aren't going to take their own stuff back. That isn't what this is about. It never has been, because that's a different business. So what the companies do is they create new partnerships.
Waste managers.
Or other entrepreneurs, actually, that take that product forward and do something else with it. So that in that other loop, that new business, you have new opportunities and you have new entrepreneurial ventures. If that becomes if it becomes law and it becomes more part of our everyday life and our understanding, in the way that we changed smoking inside, seat belts, plastic bags, we can change with policy, then I think it's going to start to sort of sink into how we consume things. Already, I have to say, if I'm going to buy a mattress or a fridge, I think, who's doing the best price on takeaway? You know, it changes the way that you think about the purchase. So I think it's going to really help with the mountain, but I think that the businesses that it's going to affect are going to have to put the work in to make it from a problem into an opportunity.
I mean, with the textile side, so fashion particularly, you've got the charity industry who are then helping that system. But with interiors that I'm in, and probably most people in this room, that pickup, that aspect of reuse is still, I've designed in this system, and yet how do I ensure my customer at end of life is going to get that back into the recycling system? So it does need all these stakeholders. And
your customer isn't, because they're not going to strip the
we'd
fabric
like
off the
to think they
sofa.
don't want to not use it, but let's think about life beyond my life. Long ancestors of you, like you say, that's where I get fascinated with how that.
Yeah, you're building in its next lives. It's a different design challenge with the original. So the question is, what changes? Now I've got to see this thing again. What changes?
I would say Camira are doing a fine job with that.
They are.
With your Rescue 2.0. Brilliant. Does everyone know about it?
About rescue. I mean, I'm probably not the best person. We've got designers in here today that you can talk more about rescue to if you want to hang around. But rescue launched at the back end of last year. It's recycled wool fabric using our own yarn waste, and it's created using renewable flax as well. So it's a really interesting fabric. It's actually created in collaboration with our recycle experts in New Year. If you're aware of a New Year, that stands for it is never over until it is over. We acquired a New Year in 2022, and Rescue is the second fabric that we've created together, the first being Revolution. The samples on the table over there if you'd like to take a look. Is there any other questions for Becky?
Could I just ask, you mentioned a shoe which wasn't on the slides. Could we have a look at the shoe?
Yeah, of course.
It was wool.
I'll stick it up. Yeah, it's Allbirds.
Allbirds. Oh.
Yeah.
I think my question
Did you
is...
list some slides there?
That was the one.
Yeah.
That's lovely. The question about locality and the work that QA have done with fibre shop. Do you think you see a future where this could be where everyone here buys from the farm
That's a great question. The question was, can we see this sort of future locality, or this bio-local is another way of sort of saying that. It's a real thing. The bio-local economy is something the EU is investing in as viable, so that we can be, less affected when things like energy prices change, there's war, there's lockdowns, that really shook up so many industries. So this has been a kind of investment of research and development for the last 5 years or so. I think it's really interesting. I think from the project, ironically, I haven't shown this one project that I've just finished called Hereware, which was 4 years of research into bio-based materials made from agricultural waste, with the idea that it's made within different footprints around Europe, based around where biorefineries are. So you basically take you draw around the biorefinery, and then you take all the agricultural waste that you can reprocess. So we tried cow manure, not so good. We tried seaweed, not strong enough, good, but not strong enough. And then we tried the wheat straw left on the crops. And that we turned into a new filament and made clothing, and then that clothing, blah, blah, blah. It gets used in the whole point is we're not just able to do that technically, which we've always been able to do because that's the old way, in a way. It's actually that we're feeding the need, we're serving the needs of the people in that region, but we're not taking away from food production. So I think this is a beautiful model for the future. I think that we're more interested, we might be a little bit of a niche here, being interested in the grown in the UK strawberries. I know what you mean, but I've been reading a lot about psychology and our subconscious and our behaviour. And we will go to the most convenient thing, and we will go to the cheapest thing, especially in times of economic strife or other kinds of stresses. So we also have to put things on the shelf that are serving other needs. I don't, think that this is I think my experience from the bio-local circular work was that this is going to be beautiful and quite niche for quite a long time. There's no reason not to do it. I think there are tipping points that could make that bigger quite quickly. Biorefineries need a lot of volume of waste to make materials as well. So we've also got to think about how we decouple the need for the material, because we don't always want to be feeding waste in. We actually want to reduce waste, but that starves the biorefinery. And that's the same with textile to textile production. Yeah. Great question. Keep me up tonight, that one. Should we naturally pause there for some tea?
Well, thanks for joining us, everyone, and a huge thank you to Becky for a fascinating. I think Becky will be hanging around for a little while longer, so if anyone does have any other questions, feel free to come up, or if not, get a drink and network. Thank you.